I just have a real quick question about the about what you just said, that last point, and relatively stable. Does that mean when we're talking about like the temporary rate buy downs that even makes those more valuable to leverage to buy a home now? Because wouldn't it make you think stability might then lead to future declines?
Well, exactly. The thing about the temporary buy downs, whether you're talking about a 2-1 or a 3-2-1, the reason I harp on these all the time is because they address the primary prospective buyer concern about mortgage rates. Buyers are sitting on the sidelines waiting for rates to drop. That so far has been somewhat of a fool's game. We haven't seen the drops in mortgage rates that I think a lot of prospective buyers were expecting, prospective buyers were expecting. And so the temporary buy down strategy helps kind of bridge that concern and get a prospective buyer who actually goes out and buys, gives them the opportunity to get a rate in the first year in the threes or first years in the fours.
Hmm.
And if we've got what I think is a relatively stabilizing mortgage rate market, meaning that we're not going to see substantial decreases in the short run, but at the same time, I don't think we're going to be blasting through 7 and going close to 8 or beyond. I think we're going to be relatively stable in the 6% range. Then what that does, I think, is give that prospective buyer the opportunity to consider getting into the market to buy. We determine if you can qualify based on current note rates in the sixes, but then help you negotiate with your agent a temporary buy down so you can get that first year in the threes or that first year in the twos if it's a 2-1 buy down. And then again, it creates that window where the forecast is, yeah, this year probably in the sixes. Next year we get it maybe back in the fives. Who knows? In 27, maybe we can break through the five and get into the fours. Well, if that scenario plays out, then the 2-1 or 3-2-1 buy down is the perfect platform to get into home ownership now and prepare for that scenario to play out. So then at the end of your buy down period, you can refinance that note rate into something much better than in the sixes where you would start at.
You know, we talk about supply and demand as that being a normal thing, and one of the things that seemed to have driven the housing cost and the prices up was the supply. I've started to notice a little bit, and I'd love your feeling on this before we get into this next segment. Is do you start to see some increases in supply, which means now being able to negotiate concessions for the temporary buy down, even, I wouldn't say easier, but more, the buyers are more, or excuse me, the sellers are more open to that?
Well, I think so for sure. I mean, certainly in my local market here in the Palm Springs area, the Coachella Valley, there has definitely been an increase in supply. Now, it hasn't been a huge increase. It's gradually gotten closer to normal. Not too many
Hmm.
months ago, a year or two ago, we were literally looking at like a month, couple months supply of inventory. That's really, really low. Now it's grown to where we're in the 4 month, even 5 month, based on the sales rate. That's getting much closer to normal. The normal is considered to be around 6 months. And so as a consequence, you are seeing a lot more moderation in prices. We are seeing uh, more common situation where prices are being reduced from the initial list price. And yesterday, I was after the caravan meeting, for example, we had 40 houses on the caravan uh,
Wow.
this week. That's a big jump from what it was, just a few weeks ago. And I think part of it was, waiting until the beginning of the year because the last 2 years of December, not much is going on. But I went to one, it's a condominium here in Palm Springs, been on the market for 136 days. And the original list price was like 470. And the agent, when I saw him, and as an agent I know, I've done business with him, the current list price was reduced to 399.
Wow.
That's a big jump. And of course, then I told him, hey, do you anticipate you may have to drop your price further? And he said, well, maybe. And that's when I brought up the buy downs as an alternative, excuse me, to dropping his price even further. And his eyes lit up, and he likes that idea. So I told him, you end up talking to your seller and contemplating lowering your price again talk to me, let me give you some numbers. And that could be a better way to, again, address what the buyers are looking for in terms of lower rates. Give them something in the threes or the fours.
Yeah. Hey, I just want to jump back in here again. As you can tell, Art is dealing with this. What do you say? Not asthma, but
I've got like a
nasal
sinus infection going on. Yeah.
sinus infection. Sorry, I'm not. I've been blessed. I rarely get anything like that, but he's struggling with that. So if we do
But the
seem to
show
cut
must
it
go
short
on.
today, yeah, if we do seem to cut it short, no, I won't try to pick up the ball and run with it. That's probably not a good idea. I'll just run for the sidelines. But I just want you to know that respecting his voice, we just want to make sure that if that happens, we may bow out early. So Art is a fighter. He's never goes down without throwing the last punch. So we'll just keep going on.
Sure.
Well, this next section, I think is something I'm excited about. It's an opportunity to talk to you in a little bit different way, just more of a conversation. And I'm going to share some things. We call it the expert corner, and this is giving you answers to the hard questions. So that's my job, is to give you some hard questions and then get into them. And these are things, Art, that out in the marketplace, these are some of the things that are going across the wires, and I'd love for you to have some feel on, because I think of you as you're an authority in the marketplace. You've got over 4 decades of experience in doing what you do, helping other people. And I think if I were going to lean on anyone, I would lean on you for some direction. So if you don't mind, I'd like to get started with this today.
Sure. Let's do
Great. So as I say, it's called the expert corner. We're going to start out with some questions, and the first one is, we're seeing a shift in the mortgage market when it comes to what we call first-time home buyers. We can typically in our mind kind of have this picture of first-time home buyers like a young couple. Maybe they're just going to buy their first home because they've had a baby, or maybe a job change in a positive way, and they're thinking, hey, it's time to get a home. But we're kind of seeing a shift in that. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, and you're right. I think there has been a shift. That particular profile that you have on the screen there, it hasn't gone away, but there's fewer of folks fitting that profile than there used to be historically. Here's an interesting, number. First-time home buyers now, they're a lot older. The
Mm,
average age of a first-time home buyer is 38.
wow.
It used to be not too many years ago. I mean, we would expect to see first time home buyers. It would be maybe certainly, low 20s, probably not, certainly mid 20s, late 20s, maybe a little over 30, but 38 years old is pretty old as an average age for a first time home buyer. And what that implies is what's happened is, again, there's so many homes that are locked in with very low rates. There's not enough inventory that's pushed prices up. It's affected affordability even more than first-time homebuyers have always historically been dealing with. And so, as a consequence, the average age has gone up because it's taking longer for that first-time homebuyer to accumulate, the cash that they need to buy. And so, as a consequence, again, they're much older than they used to be to buy their first home. Um, and that's always, accumulating the cash for a down payment has always been, I would argue, the first or the primary challenge for a first time home buyer. I would say that's the issue more than the rate or the payment. Um, but it's even more so today. So, yeah, it's taking them longer to save up the money. And then the other thing we're seeing is the other ways that the first time home buyer comes up with the funds for the down payment. The percentages are higher. I mean, we're now looking at like 25% of first-time homebuyers use gift funds from family.
Mm,
20% of first-time homebuyers are, tapping into an investment account like a stock account if they have one. A lot of first-time homebuyers don't have that, or which we used to see a lot of, but even more now, is tapping into things like a 401k account to get their money for the down payment. And then the other thing I'm seeing a little bit more of than we haven't seen in more recent years, and I think it has something to do with the increase in home equity and the value of the equity in the current housing stock is inheritance.
Hmm.
You're seeing an uptick in the number of first-time home buyers that are able to buy because they inherited money, from family. It's up to like 7%. Um, it used to be much smaller than that. And of course, what that means is, their family, maybe it's their parents or their grandparents, uh, maybe owned a home for many years, had a tremendous amount of equity that was increased even more during the pandemic. Then they pass away, and then you've got a situation where folks are inheriting frankly, a good deal of money that now positions them to be able to go ahead and buy that first home. And of course, I think there's a relationship there. If the average age is 38 for a first time home buyer now, well, that makes sense that would mean probably more of those people who are 38 are inheriting the funds to make that purchase. You're less likely, I would argue, just in terms of demographics, if you're 25 or 28 or 30, you're probably not as likely to be inheriting funds from family members. But as you get older, yeah, your parents are older, and certainly your grandparents are older, and that gives you that opportunity to buy. So I think that's all interrelated.
I have a couple of follow-ups with that before we go to the next question. One is, um, does it appear that there are people that are probably, let's say, younger or even at that age 38 that are going along that idea of trying to save their money? They think, okay, I need 20% down, and we've talked about that before. Is that absolutely necessary to have that large of a down payment to get into a home in today's market?
No, not at all. And what's so interesting about that is that continues to hang on as a myth that
Hmm.
so many people out there think they've been almost brainwashed to believe that, oh, I can't buy a home unless I have 20% down. It's like 20% down has somehow become the standard that you have to follow in order to buy a home, and it's simply not true. And frankly, it hasn't been true for years.
Hmm.
I point out to people all the time, and I'm amazed how often people continue to be surprised by this. If you're a first-time home buyer, you can get a Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac conventional loan with a 3% down payment. That's lower than FHA.
That's a big
FHA
difference.
requires Yeah, FHA requires 3.5% down payment. Now, the other issue there is people think FHA you have to be a first time home buyer. You do not. So
Hmm.
you can be a repeat buyer and get an FHA loan with 3.5% down. And of course, conventional loans you can put 5 or 10 or 15% down. So the notion that you have to put 20% down is a myth. Now, excuse me, your payment's going to be higher, so you have to meet the debt ratio. But if you have the income, you don't need that 20% down to complete the purchase. So that's part of what we do is evaluate, can you afford the payment, and then show you, if you can, how you can buy the home without that 20 or 25% down payment. It's just in a lot of cases not necessary.
The other little piece of follow up on that, and you don't have to get too long in it because I know you're not a marriage expert, a data expert, but are, are we starting to see that age where people get married? It seems like it's becoming later, and that is also contributing to the potential of that later or excuse me, uh, higher age before it's their first time home.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think people are waiting to get married a lot later in life than they used to, for one. I mean, that I've kind of observed that for quite a while. And then it's interesting too, given that there's like more single people out there, and then you layer into this number that the average first time home buyer is 38. Then you can look at some other data that kind of correlates to that. Like, for example, single women. 24% of these buyers are single women.
Hmm.
Only 11% are single men. And so that has some interesting implications in terms of the housing market. And we didn't used to see that. But yet I've seen that in more recent years. In fact, thinking back the last few years, in terms of transactions I've done where there was a single unmarried borrower, Yeah, for sure. Most of those, or certainly a majority of them, were not men; they were women.
Hmm.
In fact, I looked at my production here the last couple of years, and I saw that bear out very clearly. That all the purchase transactions that I've done where it was one borrower, it was single women, not single men. And of course, those single women as well were not like 25 or 28 or 30. They were 35, 40, early 40s, that kind of a thing. So there's definitely something going on there demographics wise that has generally definitely changed the current profile of the first time homebuyer.
Interesting. Well, I just want to check in with you. How you feeling?
I'm doing fine. Let's go. Keep going.
Okay, good. So let's go to the next topic, which I think again is playing heavy into this, and that is what the first time home buyer, or excuse me, the people that are coming into the market. It's kind of a phenomena that the data shows a higher percentage of people buying homes are doing so differently. What is this way, and why do you think it's happening?
Well, what I'm
And
going to say
I know
here
it's
is,
not a, it's not, I know it's not a great topic as a mortgage lender, but it's a reality.
well, yeah. I mean, I'm chuckling because I'm tempted to say a phrase that we talk about here. In fact, there was a local mortgage originator here that he was sort of famous for the phrase. But before I share that with our audience, I'll tell you that the big difference that we're seeing, and it's a head scratcher, and it's amazing, is cash.
Mm,
It's amazing how much cash is out there. I was looking at some data, on average nationally, 26% of buyers are paying cash for their homes. You know, here
that's
in my
amazing.
local here in my local market, again, Palm Springs, Greater Coachella Valley, we have 9 cities here in the valley. I've heard different numbers. The average or the number of cash buyers ranges from 50 to 65%.
Wow.
And and of course, as a mortgage originator, I don't like to hear that, right? I mean, does that mean that 2/3 of the transactions in my local market, I'm not even going to have an opportunity to help the buyer because they don't need me. They don't need a loan, or they don't
Mm,
want a loan, and they've got the cash in their pocket to just write a check to buy the home. And what's remarkable about that is a huge change in the buyer profile, the demographic, the way people have bought homes historically. That number is a very, very high number now. And you start thinking, well, why is that happening? Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the increases in home values, particularly how much they increased during the pandemic. And so what's happening is, and I've heard this locally here in our market, you've got a lot more situations where people have so much equity, they're able to sell their home, and maybe they have other cash too. And then when they go ahead and buy that next home, they don't need a mortgage. They just pay cash. In fact,
mm,
another data point I saw was 31% of repeat home buyers pay cash. I mean, that's a tremendous number. And
wow.
so you start connecting the dots, and it's like, well, of course, there's been a lot of news stories about how um, homeowners have experienced so much increase in their wealth from the growth in their equity due to these home values just skyrocketing again, particularly since 2019 through the pandemic. And so, as a consequence, there's this wealth generation that's really at historical levels. Of course, I've seen news articles that kind of whine about the fact that all the baby boomers have gotten rich because they own all the homes, and they all have a 2% mortgage and their equity has exploded. And and a lot of those people are the ones who are selling their home and buying another and paying cash. That's part of that 31% repeat buyer number. But I know here in the Coachella Valley, for example, I've heard many people, agents and so forth, will talk about, our property values here are still relatively, low compared to other major metropolitan areas, LA County, Orange County, San Diego, San Francisco area, and so forth, Pacific Northwest. And you hear stories all the time about, somebody sold their home in, San Francisco for, $4 million. And They decide they're moving to Palm Springs, and they'll put $2 million, and they net $4 million on their sale, and they put $2 million in their pocket, and they spend $2 million to buy a home cash. So that is a phenomenon in all the years I've been in this business, that I've just never seen it at these levels before. So it's just remarkable how much cash is floating around out there.
Just one little follow up on this, and this is something that again, it's just a thought on my head about this. When the pandemic hit, and everybody went remote, and then the remote workers, let's use San Francisco as an example, or LA, these are higher cost of living cities, and they said, I can do my job from someplace else, and so they did sell their home, and then they moved to, let's say, the Coachella Valley, where, example, as you said, it could be quite a bit less, or wherever it might be. Did that also, do you think that plays a contribution? Is that a contributing factor, or is that just one of these far-fetched ideas I sometimes come up with?
No, it has been a contributing factor. That was a phenomenon that was very real during the pandemic, which certainly here on my local market was a major factor in driving up home values. Now I think that's starting to change. I think it's reversing a little bit. You hear the news stories now about how employers are demanding that employees get back into the office. That working remote is not going to be allowed or as acceptable as it was, and so I think that trend of buying a home further away, and because you're able to work remote, I think that is slowing down and starting to reverse. And you're now hearing stories that people are now actually going back to city centers, which I think ultimately, if you look at a market like San Francisco, where there was some talk that home values were going to start softening because everybody was leaving to go to a more remote area because they were able to work remote. I think that impact on home values, while it was not huge, I think it's going to start to moderate and flatten out, because now people, in part because their employers are demanding they come back to the office, they're reversing course. And of course, in that respect, see, that's one area where you have a situational buyer. Remember, months ago we talked about a situational buyer. Well, now we have situational buyers where maybe they did move out to the outskirts, like here in the Coachella Valley. They're able to work remote. They bought a home. They experienced a great increase in their home equity. Now their employer's saying, hey, you need to come back to the office. We want you here. What can they do? Sell that home and go back to the city center. Now, with rates being where they're at and home prices being even back in those city centers, maybe they move back and they're renting, or they've got so much equity that they're going to get out of their sale, then they can move, maybe still buy even at these rates, and maybe don't need as big of a mortgage because they got so much cash out of their sale. They're able to, get that transaction done and still have some money left in the bank. One of the things about, and this is why I always keep harping about those buyers, prospective buyers who are on the sideline waiting for rates to fall or home prices to fall, which again, I keep saying is a fool's game. They got to understand the wealth effect of home ownership. The one data point that we heard about was, the net worth, the average net worth of a homeowner is like $415,000. The average net worth of a renter is $10,000. I mean,
Oh my gosh.
that's a dramatic spread between a renter and a homeowner. So you can gripe all you want about how unaffordable housing is and the rates are too high, the house price is too high. But if you can figure out a way to buy now, and if you qualify again at current rates, not the buy down rate, and then we can help you get that payment issue concern addressed with the temporary buy down strategy, you can get into that wealth building effect of owning the home and no longer be that renter with only $10,000 net worth.
I think that's if there was a bow you put on a present, that last piece of there about the difference of the net worth of a renter versus a buyer. I mean, talk about a leverage to say, geez, maybe we better stop paying rent and let's get a home and jump in there. Well, Art, I want to thank you for doing this. I have a couple more questions, but I'm not going to ask some of you because I know you still have some more of the program to go, and I want you to have a voice for the rest of the day. I really appreciate that. Also want to point out those people joining us live, we do take questions. Art takes questions. Just please put them in the comments. And also afterwards, if you have questions afterwards, please put them in the comments. And this is the portion of the show that we'll be diving into and answering your questions. If he doesn't do it live, if you do it afterwards, we'll talk about it the following week. So make sure to tune in. We're here on Thursdays at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Art, I want to thank you again. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.